The enemy put a bounty on his head equal to a general's salary. They called him Widowmaker, not out of respect, but out of fear. In the jungle, if you heard a twig snap, you were lucky. If you heard nothing, you were already dead. When he walked onto Fort Bragg that Tuesday morning, shuffling with a cane and wearing a faded jacket 2 sizes too big, 3 young soldiers burst out laughing. One of them, barely 20 years old, nudged his buddy and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Look at this lost old-timer. Someone's grandpa wandered off the tour bus." The old man stopped. He looked at them with eyes that had seen things no human should ever witness, and in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, he said 2 words. Widowmaker. What happened next made those soldiers wish they had never been born. If you respect our veterans, type honor in the comments right now. The morning had started like any other at the base. Soldiers moved between buildings, vehicles rumbled across the grounds, and the summer heat was already pressing down despite the early hour. The old man had arrived in a taxi, which itself drew curious glances. Visitors usually came in family cars or rental vehicles, not worn-out yellow cabs. He paid the driver with exact change from a small leather pouch, the kind nobody carried anymore, and stood for a long moment at the main gate, just looking. His frame was slight, almost fragile, and his white hair was thin across a spotted scalp. The jacket he wore had patches so faded they were nearly invisible, and his khaki pants hung loose on legs that had once been powerful. He walked with the careful deliberation of someone for whom each step required conscious effort, his cane tapping a slow rhythm on the pavement. The 3 soldiers were on a smoke break near the visitor's entrance when they spotted him. They were young, confident, and full of the invincibility that comes with being in peak physical condition and wearing the uniform of the world's most powerful military. The tallest one flicked his cigarette and watched the old man approach the security checkpoint. $5 says he's looking for the museum, he said. His companions laughed. The old man reached the checkpoint and spoke quietly to the guard on duty, who frowned and picked up a phone. The conversation was brief, and then the guard waved the old man through with a respectful nod that the young soldiers found puzzling. As the veteran shuffled past them, moving toward the administrative building, the boldest of the 3 stepped into his path. "Hey there, Pops. You sure you're in the right place? This isn't the VFW hall." The old man stopped and looked up at the soldier who towered over him by nearly a foot. There was no anger in those pale blue eyes, just a profound weariness and something else, something the young soldier was too inexperienced to recognize. "I have an appointment," the old man said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the voice of someone whose throat had been damaged, perhaps by smoke, perhaps by screaming orders across impossible distances, perhaps by decades of silence. "An appointment?" The second soldier laughed. "With who? The base historian? You here to donate your old helmet or something?" The old man's thin lips pressed together. He reached into his jacket pocket, and for a moment the soldiers tensed, but he only pulled out a worn piece of paper, a letter with an official seal. "I was invited," he said simply. "They asked me to come." The third soldier, the youngest of the group, squinted at the letter but couldn't make out the details from where he stood. "Invited for what?" he asked, genuinely curious now despite his mockery. The old man carefully folded the letter and returned it to his pocket. He looked at each of them in turn, and something in his gaze made them uncomfortable, though they couldn't say why. "They want to know about Widowmaker," he whispered. And then he said those 2 words again, claiming them as his own. "I'm Widowmaker." The soldiers exchanged glances and burst into laughter. The tall one doubled over, slapping his knee. "Widowmaker," he howled. "That's your call sign? What did you do? Bore the enemy to death with stories about the Depression?" The boldest one stepped closer, his shadow falling over the frail veteran. "Listen, old-timer. Widowmaker was a legend. 93 confirmed kills in Vietnam. 17 confirmed kills in one single day during the Tet Offensive. The guy was a ghost, Command said he could hit a target from distances that were supposed to be impossible. He gestured at the old man's trembling hands, the cane, the stooped posture. "You're telling me that was you? Come on, my grandmother could probably outshoot you right now." The old man said nothing. He simply stood there, enduring their ridicule the way he had endured so many other things in his long life. A small crowd was beginning to gather, other soldiers drawn by the commotion, some smirking, others watching with uncertain expressions. The security guard who had let him through was speaking urgently into his radio, his face pale. The confrontation might have continued, but a sound cut through the laughter. It was distant at first, the growl of engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. The soldiers turned to look as a convoy of 3 black SUVs came roaring down the main road, lights flashing. They screeched to a halt near the visitors' entrance, and doors flew open before the vehicles had fully stopped. What emerged made the young soldier's blood run cold. The base commander stepped out first, a 2-star general whose name alone could end careers with a single phone call. Behind him came the command sergeant major, and then, emerging from the second vehicle, a figure that made several onlookers gasp. He wore 3 stars on his shoulders. A lieutenant general. He had driven over from the Joint Special Operations Command, a 40-minute trip he had, apparently made in 20. And behind him, stepping out of the third vehicle, came 2 elderly men in civilian clothes, their postures still military straight despite their age, their chests heavy with medals they had chosen to wear today. The 2-star general walked straight toward the small group, his eyes locked on the frail veteran. The young soldiers snapped to attention, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning dew. But the general walked right past them as if they didn't exist. He stopped in front of the old man, and to the shock of everyone watching, the general's eyes were glistening with moisture. "It's really you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I got the call that you were coming, I thought it was a mistake. We thought you were dead. We've thought you were dead for 30 years. The old man's weathered face creased into the ghost of a smile. "Reports of my death were exaggerated," he whispered. "I just wanted to be left alone. But then I got your letter about the memorial, and I thought—" He paused, and his voice cracked. "I thought maybe it was time." The 3-star general approached and did something that made the young soldier's jaws drop. He saluted. A 3-star general saluting a frail old man in a parking lot. "Sir," the general said, holding the salute until the old man, with trembling effort, raised his own hand to return it. "It is the honor of my career to finally meet you." The next hour transformed the base into something none of the young soldiers had ever witnessed. Word spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire. The Widowmaker was alive. The Widowmaker was here. Senior NCOs who had built their careers on maintaining composure openly wept when they shook the old man's hand. A retired colonel who lived nearby drove over in his bathrobe when he heard the news, refusing to take the time to change. The story began to emerge in fragments, shared by the generals and the elderly veterans who had served with him, pieced together for the gathered crowd. During the Vietnam War, he had been inserted alone into enemy territory more times than anyone could count. He never worked with a spotter because no one could keep up with him. He would disappear into the jungle for weeks at a time, and enemy officers would simply start dying, one by one, from impossible distances. The enemy had put a bounty on his head so large that American command worried about betrayal. They needn't have. Every soldier who knew him would have died before giving him up. The 3 young soldiers stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces ashen. The tall one looked like he might be sick. The bold one couldn't stop staring at his own hands, the same hands he had used to mockingly gesture at the veteran's trembling fingers. The youngest one had tears streaming down his face, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. When the ceremony moved inside, the base commander paused and turned back to look at them. His expression wasn't angry. It was something worse. It was disappointed. "You 3, he said quietly. "You stay right here. We'll discuss your conduct later." They stood in that parking lot for 4 hours, at attention under the brutal summer sun. No one brought them water. No one spoke to them, and every single person who walked past looked at them with the same expression of contempt. Inside, the old veteran was finally receiving the recognition he had refused for 50 years. But he asked for one thing, just one thing, before the formal ceremonies began. He asked to speak to the 3 young soldiers alone. They were brought to him in a small conference room. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat, their legs shaking from standing so long. They couldn't meet his eyes. The old man sat in a chair that seemed to swallow his slight frame, and he studied them for a long moment. When he spoke, his whisper somehow filled the room. "I was your age once," he said. "I was cocky too. Thought I knew everything. Thought I could tell a man's worth by looking at him." He paused, and his pale eyes grew distant. "Then I went to war, and I learned that the quietest men are often the most dangerous, and that the ones who brag the loudest are usually the first to break." He leaned forward, and despite his frailty, there was something in his presence that made the soldiers shrink back. "I don't want your careers ruined. I told the general that. What I want is for you to remember this day, remember how wrong you were, and the next time you see an old man shuffling down the street, I want you to wonder what he might have done, what he might have sacrificed, what nightmares he might still carry." His voice dropped even lower. "Because I promise you, boys, every single veteran you meet has given something, and most of them have given more than you'll ever know." The 3 soldiers served as the old veteran's personal escorts for the remainder of his visit. They carried his bags. They opened his doors. They stood at attention whenever he entered a room. And on the last day, when he prepared to leave the base that had become a pilgrimage site for hundreds of soldiers who came just to glimpse the legend, the boldest of the 3 approached him with tears in his eyes. "Sir," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know how to apologize for what we did. I've never been so ashamed in my entire life." The old man looked at him for a long moment, then reached out with a trembling hand and patted the young soldier's cheek. "Son," he whispered, "I've killed 93 men. I carry their faces with me every single night. You think a few words from some young fool could hurt me?" He smiled, and for a moment the soldiers could see the man he had once been. The ghost in the jungle, the whisper of death that enemy commanders feared more than entire battalions. Just be better. That's all any of us can do. Just be better. He shuffled toward the waiting car, and every soldier on that base, from the newest, private to the 3-star general, stood at attention and saluted until he was out of sight. If this story reminded you that heroes don't always look like heroes, subscribe to this channel, because every day we honor the ones who sacrificed everything and asked for nothing in return.